Welcome back in, everybody. It's the 21 off season still. Hope you're doing well. I've been away working for a while, so I'm getting to come back in and kind of hit on these draft picks. I'm sure you guys have already looked through a lot of draft analysis since the draft on these six guys. Um, so I'm finally coming in here getting in my 2 cents worth at the last. I am interested, before I break into my opinions here, hit me up in the comments section. I would like to know from you guys which one of these picks was your favorite, and maybe even toss in who you didn't draft, the one guy that you didn't draft that you really wish you had drafted because you could have. Okay, so I'm not talking about the top 10 guys or anything like that, but when it was your turn to draft, who was the one player that the team didn't get that you really, really wish they had have gotten? And then out of these six picks, what's your one favorite out of the six that they got? All right, let's start breaking it down. Nick Bolton right here. Basically, I put Bolton and Humphrey in the same category. I don't necessarily know that either one of these guys is going to start in 2021. It wouldn't personally surprise me if one of them did or both of them did. I don't think there's any pressure for either one of them to start this year. Bolton at linebacker and Humphrey at center, but it wouldn't surprise me. But I basically, assuming that everything we've seen on film from Nick Bolton and Creed Humphrey is true and projects accurately into the NFL, and I think it does. Assuming all of that is true, I expect both Bolton and Humphrey to be starting by 2022. I think they're both, especially Bolton, I think they're both going to play some significant snaps this year. And by significant, I mean somewhere between 200 and 400. And, it wouldn't surprise me if one or both of them doesn't crack into the starting lineup by midpoint of the season or by later in the season. But I fully expect both of these guys. I hear the word value tossed all over the place during the NFL draft, and it's a bit too much, to be honest. But, Brett Beach came out before the draft and said he thought that there was good value at 58 and 63. And what if you're really gonna be genuine here, what you really mean by that is it's a deep draft, and the guys that you pick at 58 and 63, really you could make the argument that they're just as talented and just as athletic as the guys getting picked at, say, 34 and 45. And that's just really what that means at the end of the day. So when you've got Bolton and Humphrey here, you have guys who may not quite be good enough to just step in and start right away, although I think they possibly could. There's really no pressure on them to do that. They've got basically all of 2021, barring injuries, to really kind of work their way into the system and get acclimated. But by 2022, I think both of these guys are starting. I think Humphrey is starting at center for the Chiefs. I think Bolton is starting at linebacker for the Chiefs. I don't necessarily know that either one of these guys projects to be, an all-time great, but I do expect that they are going to be solid players and probably pick up maybe even, and I hate to label it this quick, but maybe even pick up a couple of Pro Bowls along the way. I think each of them are that good. I think they're that solid. I just think they're solid. I don't think there's hardly any risk here with either one of these players. And I really, really like what the Chiefs did here in getting both of these guys. I think Bolton, if anybody was ever a money pick, and by that I mean a salary cap pick, Bolton is, because when you look at the linebackers for the Chiefs, specifically, you get it down to Anthony Hitchens. He's making a boatload of money. I forget. I think it's $10 or $11 million in cap space. When you look at the film and you start looking at what some of the grades that people put on him, he's clearly not living up to that kind of cap space. So you can't let him go this season because the dead cap hit is too much. But what you would love, because he's on the team this year, what you would love heading into 2022 is that Bolton has shown that he could step up and be that other starter, and that Willie Gay has stepped up and kind of locked down that other starter spot. Because personally, I think Gay is the best linebacker on the team at this point, pending what Bolton can do. If you have those two guys starting at linebacker, Bolton and Gay, I really think you've got two young guys there who could hold down the fort for the next 3 or 4 seasons, and then depending on how the contracts work after that. But the idea is, if Bolton steps up and plays well this year, then in 2022 offseason, you could let Hitchens go. You save, I think it's $9 or $10 million in cap space that you can then use to make up the difference in the Patrick Mahomes step up in contract money, or devote that to somewhere else on the roster. So I think that's a cap space move. That's a cap space pick. But, you know, you're going to improve the linebacker spot too, I think. I really do think both of these guys, Bolton and Humphrey, are going to be starters at least by the start of 2022, as I projected. Again, there are no guarantees, okay? Joshua Kane, you know, picked in the 4th round, I think 144 overall. Kane is a guy, and I've got Kane and Smith basically in the same category here. Kane is a guy who almost anything could happen with Kane. He could put on some weight, learn a few techniques about edge rushing, and be an absolute star in the NFL. He's got that kind of athleticism. On the flip side, he could continue to have injury troubles like he's had the past 2 years at Florida State, and he might never actually even step on an NFL football field. Or it could waffle out to somewhere in between. He's not a project. You know, you look at Pisano when he came out of, I think it was Villanova 4 seasons ago. He was a real project. I mean, he was raw, and Kansas City worked him into shape, and in year 1, he didn't do anything. Year 2, he got a little bit of playing time. By year 3, he was playing some meaningful snaps, and then by year 4, he was contributing. It took a long freaking time to get Pisano into a real, viable, true, contributing, important NFL player. He wasn't a star by any means, but he was contributing. Kane is not that raw. He's not anywhere near that raw. He's a lot more polished, but still it brings to mind the images of Pisano, in that you know you have a guy who here is an athlete, but something is keeping him from living up to that. And there is not a more classic I guy in the whole draft, that is injuries and inconsistency, than Joshua Kane out of Florida State. I mean, the guy can play football. And in the first 2 years for the Seminoles, he absolutely did that. All over the place, just an absolute wrecking ball, off the edge, just, I mean, thrilling people to death. And in the last 2 seasons, it's been injury, injury, injury. And even when he's on the field, it's kind of rusty and slow and inconsistent. So that gets guys at the college level, it gets guys at the NFL level, and sometimes, I've said this a million times, I'll probably say it for the rest of my life, it can be a vicious cycle, and that's just the way some guys' character is on the football field. Injuries and inconsistency, it just kind of cycles its way through. So Joshua Kane, almost anything could happen with him if he can be healthy. And we've seen it before. We've seen guys who at the college level for a season or 2 seasons seemingly just had injury, and then get to the NFL and they're fine. Okay, so we've seen this before. It's not the first time. I don't really have any huge concerns on Kane versus what I might have over some other players injury-wise, but just keep in mind, everything's on the table with Joshua Kane. I would like to see him put on a little bit more weight, a little bit more muscle. I think unless he just learns some techniques that allows him to continue to be a quick twitch edge rusher, then he's going to have to put on at least a little bit of muscle so he can hold up to NFL life and to life in the trenches. But we'll see about that with Kane, I've got the arrow there because, and same thing for Smith, because I think the potential on him is so high to be higher than what he was drafted. I understand why he was drafted in the 4th round at 144, or why he could have been drafted even lower in the 5th or 6th round. But I really like this approach by Kansas City. Anytime you can draft somebody whose athleticism really is well known to be somewhere in the top 40 or 50 players in the draft. I mean, their athleticism, same thing for Trey Smith here, I'll get to in a minute. Same thing for both these guys. Anytime you can draft those guys in rounds 4, or especially 5, 6, 7, 4 is kind of that midway, but 5, 6, 7, even 4, anytime you can draft somebody whose athleticism is top 40, top 50, and you can get them down in the 4 to 7 range, there's excellent potential there. I mean, you have nothing to lose, especially when you get down to rounds 5, 6, and 7, and round 6 for Smith here. You have absolutely nothing to lose, all right? A lot of the guys that are drafted in these ranges are borderline questionable, suspect NFL players to begin with. Their talent level, their athleticism, their speed, their jumping, whatever you want to define that as, is just borderline. But with Kane and with Smith, it's not. It is clear these guys belong on an NFL football field. I mean, it just couldn't be more clear. And yet for Kane, the injuries may very well hinder that. We'll see about that moving forward with Kansas City. We'll keep an eye on that. I'm going to drop down to Trey Smith here because it's the same conversation except for a different reason. He's had the medical issues. I'm not going to dive into that today. I'll try to keep this video at least to a modicum of short. But Trey Smith coming through Tennessee, man, there are times where he is dominant, has been dominant, even in his freshman season. My goodness, playing for the Volunteers, there were times where the guy just flat dominated on the offensive line. And the toughness and the size and the physicality. I love the fact that Kansas City is actually trying to get a couple of these guys here, again, whose talent level is just way, way up there in the late first, early second round category, and yet if we're here medical issues for Smith, a lot of teams just didn't even want to touch him, and for two reasons. Some teams are concerned that maybe he'll never get on the field, and then other teams are just concerned that, well, we're going to have to deal with this for the next 2 or 3 seasons, and by the time he gets through with it, his rookie contract is going to be up, and we will basically have just kind of wasted a draft pick. So I don't feel like that for Kansas City. I have absolutely no problem with that, especially when Kansas City has a good roster already. You really can afford to take chances like this when you have a very good roster. You can afford to grab a couple of players who you know that there's a high risk, high reward, but the reward is so much higher than the risk. The risk is only a late 4th round draft pick and a late 6th round draft pick. That's all the risk that there is associated with these two players. That's absolutely it. And at any point in time, you want to let them go. The financial risk, there is none. You just basically swallow a dead cap of about $200,000 to $700,000, and that's it. So, love doing that, especially for a team like Kansas City when they already have a very good roster, a roster that's right there at the top of the league with anybody out there. You can afford to risk some of these draft picks on players just like this. Okay. Noah Gray coming out of Duke University. I've already done a 30-minute video on Kelsey and Gray, and so I'm not going to dwell on Gray for very long here. I like Gray. I didn't think Kansas City was going to use a draft pick on tight end. They surprised me. I like it. I would have liked any tight end that they had picked. I like Noah Gray specifically. I do want to address one thing that I didn't really fully address in the 30-minute video, and then you can see that here either shortly before or shortly after I post this one. With Noah Gray, he did post a 40 time of somewhere like 4.62, 4.67, depending on which website you want to watch, and that did put him basically like number 2, somewhere between 2 and 4 in the tight ends of this year's draft. And his straight line speed, according to this year's draft by tight ends, is pretty good. It just really did not translate, and I'm kind of borrowing off the video that I made specifically with him. It just really did not translate into massive on-field success. So it's a little bit tricky there when you're looking at 40 times and you're like, why didn't this guy? He had 51 catches in 19. He had 29 in 2020. Why didn't this guy actually explode? Why is he only getting drafted in the 5th round? Well, for whatever reason, that straight line 40 time, don't know if that's really how fast he is or not, or if he just got prepared for this year's pro day or whatever, but that 40 time did not translate into dominance on the college football field. Was above average for college level competition, and I do like him here in the NFL, and I do think that he's going to contribute, and whether or not he ever starts for Kansas City or whether he's a backup or tight end 2 for Kansas City for 4 years and then goes on to be a starter somewhere else, we'll see. I do think he's going to contribute. I do like the pick. I did like him at Duke. I do like him here for Kansas City. I think it works all the way around. Feel free to watch the other video. You'll get the rest of my thoughts, but I did want to address that. I understand that the 40 time in there is pretty fast for a tight end for 2021, but the tight end class as a group was a little bit down this year once you got past, I think, Kyle Pitts from Florida. But having said that, Gray's a good pick right there at number 5 in the 5th round, and you got somebody who I think can step in probably right away and be tight end 2 or backup tight end, depending on which way you want to go with that. Cornell Powell is a guy here. I keep up with Clemson to some degree. I'm not a Clemson fan, but I do keep up with them just because they're in the national prominence. Cornell Powell is a guy who nobody, you would have to be a diehard Clemson fan to know who Cornell Powell was before 2020. I mean, you would really have had to have kept up with the draft boards. And by the way, there are some very diehard Clemson fans out there, but you would have really had to have kept up to really remember Cornell Powell was even on the roster. Certainly nobody thought that he was going to break out the way he did in 2020 for Clemson. there might have been some people who said, hey, he's going to step up and contribute, but to be able to just explode like he did, I mean, he contributed almost next to nothing in his first 3 seasons there for Clemson. And in 2020, he just exploded. I don't remember the yardage and catch numbers off the top of my head. He was tremendous in 2020 for the Clemson Tigers. Now, his athleticism is a little bit limited. I think he checks in at like 6 foot 205, something like that. He's not a tall wide receiver. He's not a particularly fast wide receiver. He's just a good, solid receiver. So I don't project him to ever be a star. I don't expect him to ever be a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 for that matter. But this is a guy who can step in and be kind of that third, fourth best wide receiver and be solid. And so I like that for Kansas City. Does he provide depth? Well, if he belongs in an NFL football field, he does. If he can contribute meaningful snaps, then he does provide depth. If he really can't do that, if his athleticism proves to be too limiting, then he's just a name taking up a place on a roster. Okay, so I like the Cornell Powell pick. I think it fits right in with what Kansas City needed. You're not going to find a whole lot of just excellent, exuberant wide receivers there at the 5th round, but I think this is a good, solid pick here. He's a good, solid receiver. I do like the fact that he exploded in his final year. It kind of gives the indication that maybe this guy is a late bloomer. Maybe he can step up and learn more. Maybe if he just really, maybe he's got enough athleticism to where he just outworks everybody, and he's just that disciplined and that tough that he can have a stellar NFL career. We've seen it before. We've seen guys who did not have a lot of athleticism, and his athleticism, I'm not trying to cut it down, but it was just right there. You know, it wasn't top 10 for wide receivers this year. It was right around top 25, top 30 for wide receivers. So some NFL teams would not have even drafted him. Other NFL teams might have drafted him right around this time as well. His athleticism is not superior in any way. There's nothing giving him an edge here in the NFL. But we've seen it before. We've seen other guys at wide receiver and at other positions whose work ethic and whose discipline was just so off the charts, and whose heart was there that they had enough athleticism to put together a stellar career. I think Kansas City is a great place for him. I don't think there's any pressure for him. I think he walks into a great offensive system. I think he walks into a team, I think he walks into a team who knows how to put together a beautiful offense, and I think he walks into a team who needed some depth at wide receiver. So if somebody goes down, he's going to step in and play right away if he can play at all. And I think that he can. I think that he can step in and contribute. But we'll see about Cornell Powell. Again, the athleticism is right there on the edge, which is not unusual. You expect that for almost anybody drafted in rounds 5 through 7, and the undrafted rookie free agents. You expect that their athleticism is right there on the edge, and it really starts to be a thing about how hard are they working, how smart are they, what is their football IQ, what is going to carry their limited athleticism and give them an actual solid NFL career. That's exactly where Cornell Powell fits. All right, so I think we've covered everybody. We covered Trey Smith there at the bottom. That's kind of my thoughts here on the NFL draft. I like all of these picks. I didn't necessarily see anybody that I would have drafted for sure ahead of anybody else. I think the one thing that I didn't have questions at, I think it was right here with Humphrey maybe, was the guy from LSU, and I'm totally blanking on him. You guys can tell me about it. We talked about him right before the NFL draft, the tall receiver from LSU. I would be interested to have been a fly on the wall for all of this process for all the NFL teams, all 32 of them, and to have heard the discussions on draft day about who to draft. But I would have been interested. I think it was right there for center at Humphrey, whether or not there was any consideration about taking Terrace Marshall, the tall wide receiver from LSU, versus taking Creed Humphrey. That was really the only point at which I thought maybe there was a toss-up pick there, but I was totally fine with the fact that they got Humphrey. I probably would have also been fine had they picked up Terrace Marshall, because I do think he's a very good athlete, and he's got that height advantage over a lot of people that would have been guarding him. But let me know your thoughts on all of that. We'll talk again here in the future. We're still got to cover the Orlando trade at left tackle. We've still got to cover some of these things more in detail, and we'll go back through all the position groups. Hope you're doing well. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye.